This is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
Hello and a pleasant good night to you. I'm Shane Seeley and welcome to another edition of The People's Business. And tonight the topic is tourism. So fasten your seatbelts because we're going to take you on this 8 o'clock flight as we talk about tourism related matters and of course the shift in policy recently announced by the Health Minister, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic. Let me first welcome my guests tonight. We have Roseanne Myers. She is the chair of the Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporated. We also have Paul Doyle. He's the owner of the Crane Hotel. And Dr. Lynda Williams. She's the president of the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners. So stick around. We have a great show lined up for you as we talk tourism and the policy shift. We'll take a break here and be back. This is The People's Business and we are talking about the tourism policy shift. You may remember on Friday, the Health Minister, Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostic, during one of the most recent press conferences, made the announcement about this policy shift for arrivals into the country. Here's what he had to say.
When we move to a situation that we are in at this point of serious community transmission, the vast majority of our positive cases are within our communities. So the main effort, our battlefield has shifted from the port of entry to the communities. We do not have infinite resources in this country. Our human resources capacity that is stretched at this time because of this surge that we are experiencing. And also our material resources. We have to look at swabs and tests and reagents and all the kits and all the things that are required because this is a protracted war. A prolonged effort is required here. So it was a simple task of really determining exactly where we needed to place our main effort. And the main effort really is the community and community testing resulting from the high number of positive cases that we've been getting over the last several days.
So the health minister, they're explaining that shift in policy, and the shift really is that for arriving passengers, they don't have to be tested on arrival at the Grantley Adams Airport once they have been tested in their home country. So it's a bit of a shift from what we would normally do as a buffer to protect the country from coronavirus cases. They also explained that the number of cases detected at the airport, the port of entry, has been minimal. Also, the Prime Minister has supported the stance now being taken. She is saying, and I quote, "It is no sense deploying resources to fight a battle that is non-existent at our ports of entry when in truth and in fact, it's in the middle of the country. That's where the battleground is right now in the communities, a point reiterated there by Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Bostick. So let's go to our guests now to find out what their thoughts are on this policy shift. Roseanne, I want to start with you because as a traveler recently coming into the country myself from London, doing the PCR test there and then doing the PCR test here on the ground, some may wonder why. And I'm guessing you would have had many travelers, people coming into the country asking, why should I do a PCR test there, be negative there, and then come in and do another PCR test?
Well, I think that when we put as an island, we put the initial protocols in place, the world was a slightly different place. If you remember, it was May that the protocol was put in place, and it was put as a second layer of protection for visitors that were coming in. I think Minister of Health explained very clearly why the shift has been made from their perspective. And from a tourism perspective, we follow the lead of health. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that the Ministry of Health has kept us reasonably safe so far, and the community spread, they want to now focus their full attention on which is most appropriate. So at this point, I basically would have to say that a number of not only visitors but Barbadians have complained about the second test, the cost of having to quarantine, and all that went with it. So there has been, I think, a sense of relief from some quarters that no longer exists. And from a competitive perspective, a number of our neighbors within the Caribbean never actually had that second test. So it's been a very interesting development for us as we come to the winter season, and on many fronts, very, very much welcome, because it did add a burden of costs, certainly for Barbadians coming in. But again, tourism follows the lead of health. And if that is what the Minister of Health and his team of experts have determined is the best for us at this point, and nothing is forever, but at this point, that is what they've determined is the best for us, then we basically will take full advantage to ensure that all of our prospective clients and all of our prospective visitors are fully well aware that they will no longer need to quarantine.
Well, you're right. The cost definitely an issue for Barbadians coming back in. And I want to bring in Paul here because I was fortunate enough to stay at the Crane Hotel to quarantine for that night. I had to pay for a PCR test there because I wanted to get my results as quick as possible. I wanted everything to be fast, everything to be quick. Coming through the airport, fast track to the Crane, get my test results. I got them in 4.5 hours, which was amazing. I'll talk a bit about the process and now how this change will affect the Crane, because I'm figuring you would have had people who would have booked in advance coming into this, what is the winter tourist season, book those tests. What happens now? Oh, well, it seems as if Paul is having some technical difficulty. We hope to get him back on to answer that question. But let's go to Dr. Williams now, the president of BAMP. I know for a long time BAMP has been lobbying for this extra layer of protection. Yes, you get the test in your home country, but that test here ensures that you do not have COVID coming into the country, which could cause a problem. And of course, then you would have to quarantine for a specific number of days. Now you don't have that layer of protection. What is your take on this new situation?
So thanks for having me, Jane. Let me just state up front that I'm being very cautious about what I say here today, because we would have just been able to look at the protocols in real time as they came out, just like everyone else. We are just now seeing them, digesting them, and understanding the changes that were made. Although we were integral in the initial process, that was, major. And as Ms. Myers stated, the the world was a different place then. We were dealing with the alpha variant, not the delta variant. And so Barbados was different from a lot of other countries in that we put our faith in our ability to be able to have this double layer, as it were, of testing in country, which mitigated some of the risk, and then having people quarantine and test again here. What I will say about that is that there's benefits and there were drawbacks even in what we were doing. We have to recognize that testing on arrival, as people came into the country, did not really, it was a compromise. It was a compromise layer if we tested on the same day. We had more lobbied for testing after arrival, 2 or days after arrival, because if the exposure was during travel, then that would mean that you would give the virus some time to multiply and replicate within the person, and you would be better able to pick it up after they were here and not necessarily on the same day as arrival. So we always felt that the on arrival testing was a bit of a compromise. It comes as no surprise, therefore, that the majority of fully vaccinated people, less than 1% of them, were testing positive on arrival. So what this means now is that we have to look at the situation and how it has changed. One of the things we don't want to see happen again is we don't want to see in this second winter tourist season an overwhelming of our testing capacity on island. That would be disastrous if that situation were to happen. So there is a need to rationalize resources. We do recognize that. We do recognize that there is a need to look at how many resources we have and what we can do to help the surveillance within the country as well as surveillance of people coming into the country. Now, there are some causes for concern, and I haven't really fully discussed these as yet with the persons in Ministry of Health, but there are some causes of concern that remain. First of all, the variants. Yes, that is a future situation. There is the possibility of variants that can come in, and there is a rise in cases in the market as we currently speak. And that rise in cases means that being still having a very low percentage of persons vaccinated here, we would still have a risk of being exposed to those people who, even though vaccinated, can transmit the virus to people here. So those are 2 areas of cause for concern. However, we think that there's not only one fit. We are thankful that there will still be random testing, which is a surveillance method of persons coming in. They will be subjected to rapid testing. That's what we see in the protocol. And so there's still some measure of surveying the person when they come into the country. And of course, then we would be able, if those persons test positive, to subject them to variant testing as well. So there's still some element of surveillance that's left. It's not that everybody will be able to come in and there will be no testing at all.
Would you have gone this route at this time, though, looking at this new policy shift?
But I'm not here to second guess the Ministry of Health. What I will say is that this is something that they have said very clearly, that if they need to pivot, if there's a need for change, that they will do. And certainly we will take them at their word in that, and believe that should any situation arise where there is a need for a change, that will be speedily addressed. Right. Of course, the concern we have would be the timing of the test, and we appreciate that people will get that standard PCR right before they leave, but as I said, the ideal testing based on science would be after they arrive in country and not necessarily on arrival. So that's still something that, there are other ways that that could have been worked out, but this is the way that has been chosen.
Well, Paul is back with us on the line. Paul, how does this policy shift affect the Crane Hotel? You would have set up the lab there at the Crane to make it easy for your guests to get that PCR test. How does it affect the Crane going forward into the winter tourist season?
We have a lot of lab capacity available. We were gearing up to test what the government needed to have tested for the visitors coming here. And it seems that that's not going to be necessary right now. So we just have a lot of capacity that is probably going to be unused. I just want to take a second and comment on what I heard from Dr. Williams. I think the government did the right thing when they saw that you've got fully vaccinated people, that they were doing 2 PCR tests within 3 days, which is a lot, and that they would, to, I guess, enhance tourism, that they would get rid of one of the tests. I think the other point that they would, the minister spoke of, what's available to them and how they needed, from a time point of view and materials and people and everything, that they're best spending the time dealing with locals. And I 100% agree with that. I think the difference I would have is that the local private labs that there's two of them. There's the Crane, we call it Barbados COVID Lab, and the lab at Bayview is quite capable of testing the tourists as they come in and testing all of the tourists, freeing up the government to test locals. And to what Dr. Williams said is that the difference is really timing. One of the things that surprised me as I studied this is that the virus grows so fast, so rapidly, exponentially. In 3 days, there's 1 million times more virus than there was at the beginning. And at 5 days, there's it's like 1 billion times more virus, 10 billion times more. So that a test after arrival is going to find the people that are positive far more than even the same test given overseas. The other benefit of testing, I mean, obviously the number one thing for testing is find the people that are positive. And a test here, rather than a test there, is going to find everything that the test there would find, plus a lot more, because it has, let's say, 5 extra days. Because you've got 3 days before the test, and in England it's actually 3.5 days before the test. Then you've got the day of arrival for 4.5 days, and then people aren't really getting out into society till the day after they arrive. So it's what happens on that fifth day or 5.5 days, and there's just so much more virus to detect. It's so easier, and it's so easy to miss it when you test early, or you're going to find people that are positive that by the time they get here they're negative. That a test here, to me, it's kind of I'm thinking a tweak to the proposal, which is don't test where the people live, but test here. And the benefit, is clearly that it's just a much better test. Also, the country can mandate what the quality of that test is, which they can't do when it's overseas. And the test here is a lot less money for the tourist, and it's a lot more convenient because we do it at the hotel. So I think I would think that it should be looked at to just tweak, because all of their reasons are correct, and they have a phenomenal amount to deal with. But the local labs have been gearing up for a year to get ready for the time when we're dealing with all the tourists, and we're ready. And we can do it for less money, more convenient, but more important to the country, far more accurately than a test that was taken 4 or 5 days ago in their home country.
Okay, so just to be clear, Paul, and I think we will be taking a break very shortly. Actually, we're going to go to a commercial break right now. But we want to welcome you callers to call in with your questions as well. Those numbers to call, 228-5562, 228-5563, to join the discussion on tourism as we talk about the policy shift. We'll take a break and be right back. And this is the time we want to hear from you, our callers. Those numbers to call, 228-5562, 228-5563, as we talk about tourism and the policy shift. And we do have a call on the line. Good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
Good evening. I hope I'm the right. Yes, okay. Yes, my concern, I just heard the hotelier, the Crane Beach hotelier, and I want to congratulate them for putting up a testing center there, because I know people here who are attempting to travel are going there in order to get their test. But I just heard him say that it is better to test visitors coming in rather than testing them the 72 hours before in their place, because the test here is better. Or he gave a lot of benefits for testing here. My concern is, what is the jeopardy of not testing before people come here and only testing when they come here and then finding out that they may be positive? Hasn't that already given us a problem?
Well, Paul, that question is for you, and I think Dr. Williams would want to weigh in on that as well.
So I think the first thing is, what will the test overseas find? And I think when we do the math and we work back to say there's, and I'll just pick a number, I think, if there's around 10 days between when you catch the virus to when it becomes really infectious to when it ceases to be infectious, give or take some days, but just to pick a number. When you test, let's say 5 days before the people are actually going to be traveling in Barbados, then it can't see the future, so it didn't pick up anything there. But a good test is not going to see something like 3 days prior to the test. So now it doesn't see the 3 days before the test, which leaves just a very few days that it will see. The other day, this is days of infection, like when did you get infected and what can it detect? Infections prior to that, it will see, but those people will be not infectious, or a lot of them will not be infectious by the time they get here. So it's a trade-off. If we're only going to have one test, which I think there's an argument for that, The test here will detect everything that matters that the test overseas would see, plus what happened in a number of days after that test. So if we tested 5 days later, which would be like the day after arrival here, we would pick up theoretically about double the cases that we so to me there's not a downside, because we're coming to hotels, and I think health has accepted that you can have home quarantine, and a hotel is actually better equipped to isolate somebody than a home is, because we have security, and it's it's a managed property 24 hours a day. So if people are positive, which I think the minister I saw him saying that 0.66% of people were positive coming in, which if, as tourism improves coming into November, December, taking, say, to make my math easy, 10,000 people coming in a week, that would be 66 positive people that we're catching now and would not catch in the future. But if we tested slightly after, let's say even the next day, we'll detect more people, plus we'll detect all the people that the original test would have found.
Paul, I think the only problem with your argument is the requirement by the airline for that PCR test before you get on the plane. I think that might be the only issue. But Dr. Williams, let's hear your side. What do you think? Getting the test here instead of in the overseas jurisdiction?
Right. I'm saying that, and Roseanne can correct me. The airlines follow the requirements of the country, and so the airlines follow what the country that you're going to requires, not necessarily that the airlines have a policy that you can't get on the airline without a test. So I'll just say that up front. Okay. So I'm just going to try to simplify a little bit what Paul said a moment ago.
Thank you.
If you test before you come, 72 hours before you come on, the issue with travel is, when does the exposure occur? When did that exposure occur? What is the exposure date? We don't know. And especially with a very transmissible variant, we don't know exactly when the date of exposure would be. So we do 72 hours before to mitigate some of the risk of you being just positive and getting on a plane. Okay? So if they test positive before the 72 hours before and you're positive, then you won't get on the plane. Okay? So if you're negative, assumingly you get on the plane. Now, if in travel or within the 72 hours or during travel, you are exposed, even if you're fully vaccinated, you can carry the virus to people who are unvaccinated. So the argument Paul is trying to make is that if you test when you're in the country, you have a chance, especially 2 days after, of picking up people who develop COVID-19 during that time of between when they were first tested and the time when they're second tested. And that's the policy we had in place before. The issue that the lady raised in her call is that then you have the people who were on the plane who now need to be quarantined, and that became an issue certainly in the last winter tourist season. And you have the people who they came into contact with here also needing to be quarantined. So then a lot more tests are generated if the person tests positive on that second test. By getting rid of the second test, basically, what they're saying is that we know that you weren't positive when you got on the plane. If you develop it coming in, we believe that those who are symptomatic, etc., we will screen out, because there's still screening, and there'll still be random surveillance. So it's not that they're abolishing all testing. There will still be random surveillance of people coming in. So we'll still screening people to see if they're positive. It's like when you go through security in America, they don't put everyone through the big X-ray machine. They send some people through, and others just, go the regular security checks. So similarly, with testing, you wouldn't survey every passenger, but they will still be doing random checks of people coming through to see if any of them are positive. Whether those random checks should be done at the time that they arrive, or whether they should be done after they arrive, that's something that would need to be discussed further.
So Roseanne, is that PCR test a requirement of the airline or the jurisdiction?
The PCR test is a requirement of the jurisdiction. I think the airlines line up behind whatever the jurisdiction has determined. But I want to just draw attention to one particular point, which is the fact that testing has evolved as well. And you can actually get same-day testing on the day of travel, which then eliminates the lag time in the 3 days. So you can get a PCR test, and the BTMI has had extensive discussions with agencies out of the UK especially, who are doing testing in and around the airport. And to me, that is the most ideal situation, where you can get a PCR test, you go to the airport a little bit earlier, and you can get a PCR test, high quality, good sensitivity and specificity on the day that you're traveling, and you know your status, and you're able to get your PCR certificate in time to board. And you know that that is, and I've heard the Ministry of Health officials speak about, and BAMP, getting your test as close to your boarding that plane as possible, being like an ideal situation. So I think as we look at what services are available, I know it's available, I think at the airport in Dallas, a number of airports in the US are doing testing on the same day, as long as it's a high quality test that really actually solves the issue of, I think it's very important that you get on that plane and you know your status. Very important, because the airlines are not actually doing reduced capacities. They're running quite full. And because the demand coming up into winter is quite high, those airlines are quite tightly packed. I think it is in our best interest, for all the reasons that Dr. Williams said, that you know your status when you're going to get on that plane as far as possible, and that you travel with that negative PCR test. So that's just following on from, from the perspective that she's brought with respect to knowing. We went through quite a torrid time of persons coming in, you have your negative PCR test, and then someone in the row 2 rows ahead or 2 rows behind you tests positive, and you are then asked to quarantine. And it can be quite disruptive. So at the end of the day, knowing your status when you're on board, I think is very important. And at the end of the day, the Ministry of Health has put in place what they think is appropriate for right now. And at the end of the day, I feel it's important for us to run with it, give them the chance to refocus their energies and attention. And like I said, nothing is forever, but at this point, that change from their perspective with a random testing perspective in place should really be something that I think we can all coalesce behind. But continue to discuss. I feel comfortable when I know that the Ministry of Health is in conversation with BAMP, and the professionals are getting together and trying to make the best decisions that they can. So I think that we'll continue to depend on that.
Now I want to come back to what you know about these services possibly being offered, these same-day services over in the UK, because I didn't have an opportunity to see it in action. But we do have another caller on the line. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
Thank you. Good night to the panel. My question is in terms of the testing. I found that most people adopt the 72-hour testing, even though there may be some avenues for same-day testing for travel, getting tested on the same day of travel, that in some jurisdictions overseas is still challenging to have a PCR test. And according to the website where the update was posted for the policies in effect for today, the random testing will be a rapid test and not a PCR test. So I don't know if Dr. Williams would want to address the difference in between those two tests. And my question for the representative of the BTMI is, in terms of travelers who are free to go, when they meet the requirements of arriving with a negative PCR test and they show proof of being fully vaccinated, I also see, according to the website update, that they must take approved transportation. What does that actually mean if they're fully free to go? So, in terms, say for example, a Barbadian returning to the island, would they be allowed, say, a family member to pick them up directly from the airport and take them home, since it's reasonable to presume they will be going home straight from the airport?
That's a good question. Why only approved transportation? We'll come to the testing part of the question, Dr. Williams, but that's a fairly good question. Why would you have to have approved transportation even though you fulfill the other requirements?
I think that is, again, every time the protocol change, you have to look at logistics. And this was discussed quite extensively, because at the end of the day, you still need to ensure that you have social distancing. You need to ensure that you have control of the flow of persons out of the airport. And we know what happens when Barbadians have to come pick up their family. They don't come in ones and twos. Sometimes they come in carloads. They stand around, and it's a little bit more difficult for the authorities at the airport to manage. So at this point, as it was in the past, the system is that you would take approved transportation to your home or wherever to get you off of the airport compound, and then you can transfer to another vehicle or whatever people want to do. But within the environs of the airport, it's determined that the best way to control your crowds, to control people standing around and waiting, is to ensure that no individual private vehicles, as it has been, can go to the airport to collect family and friends. Will that be like that forever? Don't know. But at this point, that is what is being done to ensure that we stop any congregation. And that is what the Ministry of Health has advised that we should continue to do. It has worked quite effectively because you do have approved transportation, and those persons that are collecting and are authorized to be there are still going to be there, so that you can leave the airport in an orderly manner. So at this point, that the protocol has not changed in that regard. So yes, you will definitely need to take approved transportation.
Okay, let's take a quick pause here. We'll come back and deal with the other part of the caller's question in relation to the rapid antigen and the PCR testing right after this break. We continue our discussion on tourism tonight and the policy shift. And before we went to the break, we had a caller who asked about that random testing, whether they would be using the PCR format or the rapid antigen. Dr. Williams, as far as you know, which is it?
Right. So as I said, just testing these protocols now and looking at what is said in the protocol, it says that the random testing will be a rapid antigen test. Okay. Now the person who calls may be saying to themselves, well, if they can use a rapid antigen test here, why then could the person not have a rapid antigen test instead of the standard PCR test, which is much more difficult to source in some source markets and quite expensive, particularly if it's an administered test in some source markets. So why can they not get that over there if they can do it here? And that's a reasonable question. What people have to realize is that the science of COVID is a fast-moving thing. Initially, when it was the Alpha variant, we had said that rapid testing, especially rapid antigen testing, was not appropriate in people who were asymptomatic. But now with the Delta variant, we find that people have many more copies of the virus in their nasal passage and in their throat to be tested by rapid testing. So it is much better at picking up people who are positive than it was with the Alpha variant. So it comes back down to Paul's point again. You're going to eliminate a test or you're going to reduce the cost of testing somewhere. Should we eliminate the test overseas and just do the standard PCR here? Or should we eliminate the test here and just do the standard PCR overseas, where we don't know exactly, we have no control over the quality of the test? Or should we have the rapid test done overseas or same-day testing, as Roseanne mentioned, and then when they arrive here, sometime after arrival, apply a standard PCR? All of these are permutations and combinations that can be used to keep people safe. It's not a straight answer. All of these are possibilities that need to be considered, and I think that we have to keep looking at the situation as it evolves and consider each of these options as the situation changes throughout the season.
Dr. Williams, when we return to this topic, I will ask you about your preference. But we do have another caller on the line. Welcome, caller. What's your question?
Yes, hi, good night. I have two questions, actually. The first one is, apart from the PCR COVID test, what other types are there, and is there a list that is accepted for travel? That's my first question. And the second question is, given the different variants, what variant is the current COVID test identifying? Thank you.
Dr. Williams?
Okay, so let's just try to break down the types of tests that they are. So you have a standard, what we're calling a standard PCR test. This is what we call a nucleic acid amplification test, or a NAC test. And what that test does, it does definitely certain cycles of amplifying the copies of virus that we do find, and through cycles sort of concentrating that virus so that you can pick up whether it's there or not. And that right now will detect, if the right, what we call probes are used, it's possible to detect all the current variants of concern that are in existence. So the standard test will do that. Then you have rapid PCR tests, and rapid PCR tests are also PCR tests, but they don't give that specific number of cycles that are needed to detect. And it just gives you a rough idea as to whether the virus is there or not. Most of the rapid PCR tests, particularly if you look for ones with bits of detection, the rapid PCR tests can also detect most of the variants, but of course it will be less specific and it won't detect any new variants, unlike the standard PCR test. And then you have the rapid antigen test, and that's just a rough and dirty method, so to speak, of picking up whether or not parts of the virus are present. Regardless of what it is, it doesn't tell you anything about variants or whatever, but the better rapid antigen tests are being developed so as to be able to detect fragments of the virus in the nasopharyngeal passage. So you get progressively from the standard PCR test to the rapid PCR test to the rapid antigen test, you're going down in order of ability to detect and specificity.
Now, looking at what is happening with this shift in policy, I got to get this question in here. Paul, have you seen a surge in bookings since the announcement? What are you seeing?
No, our bookings were terrific before, and I think they were Crane, and I think a number of hotels are just having a very, very good year. There's a pent-up demand for vacations. I think our challenge is to show that we're being very safe, which is, when I say our challenge, that's a bigger challenge right now, but I think people want safety more than anything. And we have to understand which market we want to go after. So bookings have been good, and they continue to be good.
Roseanne, what about the BTMI? What are you seeing in relation to the announcement and questions? I know that many people were asking about vacationing in Barbados at the Barbados High Commission and the BTMI's offices in London. What happened since the announcement?
Elation from some quarters. Very, very happy. There are people who are dedicated and love Barbados, and naturally we're a little bit hesitant about the fact that they may have to quarantine. So removing that layer, I think really has excited the market. And I'm not saying that based on anything except feedback or executives in the market in the UK, in the US, and Canada have basically fed back that it was very, very welcome news. I have heard from some members of the sharing economy, because I asked, as these things happen, I asked, what are you seeing? What is the response? And it is going to be very interesting because there are some properties that did very, very well out of the quarantine. There's some Barbadians who would never have stayed in a hotel if they didn't have to for that one night. So from that perspective, I think it has been very positive because people have said that they've had a positive experience, even though under quarantine. Those properties are going to see an immediate loss of business for those one-night stays. We have the economy to some extent who were not necessarily, and hotels who were not necessarily registered for quarantine, who would have lost business because people would have had to stay somewhere else before they could actually transfer to stay at the villa or whatever. So they're quite happy that this gives a little bit more even a situation. You can come in, you can go straight to your villa, you can go straight to your condo. The tour operators that we've gotten feedback from, very, very happy that it is, you see, once you have to start explaining to people for the multiple destinations that you're selling, the difference in requirements and protocols, it becomes a little tougher to sell. So once you remove that layer, then it is one less thing that you have to throw up as a barrier. So I would say generally, as would be expected, a welcome change at this time. I think there are other things that people are concerned about, but you have to take the wins when you get them. So once we all got that news to say that it was going to be removed, we knew that it was going to give not only tourism, but Barbadians coming home a boost to say, okay, well, this is one less thing I have to worry about. So generally, I would say, Shane, very positive, very positive.
That's good news, but we will come back to that one other layer that I'm very sure that visitors will want removed as quick as possible. But before we get to that, we have another caller. Good night. Welcome to the People's Business. What's your question?
My question is, I've traveled twice in the last couple of months, which is July, August. And I noticed that, okay, if I'm going to, I was in Canada, I have to take a test before leaving Canada, and when you come here, you have to take another test. Now, but when you take the test and have to be confined at a hotel for a night, the taxi drivers the taxi you get into, most of the drivers that take you to the hotel, when you start talking to them, are not vaccinated and are not interested in getting vaccinated. What is the government and the BTMI doing in connection with this matter? Are we going to be protected for future, that we are going to have people that are going to be vaccinated that we are traveling with? And I'm sure tourists has asked the same question. So that's my question to Mrs. Mears.
Thank you for your question, caller. Most of the visitors coming into Barbados are indeed vaccinated. I'm pretty sure it's over 90% of those coming into Barbados are vaccinated. And as the caller said, then they get into a vehicle where the taxi driver may have a conversation with that same customer, with the same visitor, and say, I'm not vaccinated and I'm not interested in being vaccinated. What is can the BTMI do anything about that? Are you trying to encourage taxi drivers and other players in the tourism sector to be vaccinated?
Well, the good news is, let me talk about the good news. We've interacted and spoken and had many meetings on the cruise side. And I'm really happy and pleased with the efforts that have been made by the two taxi associations and the small independent operators that operate in the cruise port to ensure that they're fully vaccinated. Over the summer, we took about 18,000 cruise guests, and one of the requirements was to ensure that the tours that were done, not only the tours done directly through the ship, but the ones done by the independent operators. And we were able to make that happen because most of them dealing with the guests were vaccinated. I think they went after it hard and they went after it early. And the two taxi associations, I think, have led the way brilliantly. So I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. And then we have some small tour operators who are in the process of forming a co-op, who went out to their potential members and said, if we're going to go and fight for this business, we need also to be vaccinated. So I am very pleased that, not because of any suasion from the BTMI, but from taking a responsible position and recognizing if you want to go after this business, you need to be vaccinated in order to deal with guests who are going to ask. And what the caller said is so exactly correct. We have asked people coming to Barbados to be subjected to a very high standard. You have to be vaccinated. We determine what type of vaccine you must have. And then we say you must be tested. And in the past, you had to be tested twice. So I think it is only fair and reasonable that the person would ask, are you vaccinated? But I think there's a second question. If you're not vaccinated, are you regularly tested? And if the person says, well, I'm not vaccinated, but I test once a week because it is my way of knowing my status to keep my family and my customers safe, I think that would be a reasonable compromise. From a BTMI perspective, we believe very strongly that we're in the frontline tourism. Protect our families. And you have to protect your family, not necessarily from getting the virus, because at the end of the day, you can get the virus even if you are vaccinated. But it is how ill are you going to be? How much of a burden on the medical system are you going to be? How much are you going to be able, with a high viral load, to pass it on to your family and the people that you're going home to? So we certainly would want to say and encourage, if we are going to, after working so hard to get these guests to come back to Barbados, keep them because they do have choices, keep them and say to them, look, we really want to get back in this game and we really want you to be here and be safe. Then The frontline tourism workers have to be vaccinated. And I guess, Shane, what I would say, getting a jab in your arm is not necessarily anybody's first choice, that you can rush and line up to get the jab. But we are faced with a whole set of bad choices in
Mm-hmm.
COVID. COVID has given us a set of bad choices. So it may not be your first, but there are not many options to protect yourself. They're not, and therefore we really recommend, if you're going to be in that taxi, or you're going to be that taxi driver, that person at the welcome desk at a hotel, um, it- you may figure that you can tough it out and you don't need to be vaccinated. But what about the person you're going home to? They can tough it out.
Yes.
Are they young enough? Are they strong enough? If you are vaccinated, you can fight the good fight and see how you can get over it. And now with home isolation, try to tough it out at home and be safe as you can. But these are the options and the few things in our armory to help us to save what is essentially, from what we are seeing, not essentially, potentially a very good season. But I think
Yeah.
it's what the caller asks, any reasonable person who's asked to go through all of these hoops to come to Barbados will ask. And unfortunately, if the answer that you get is no, I'm not vaccinated, but I can say no, but I test weekly and I know my status, I think we're still in with a fighting chance.
Indeed. However, testing and the percentage, the stats do show that being vaccinated is the best option for survival against COVID-19. But there's still so much more to delve into right here on the People's Business as we talk about tourism and what the future holds for the industry going into the winter tourist season. We'll take a break and be back. As we talk about tourism and the policy shift and about what the future holds for the industry as we look for a much brighter future going into the winter tourist season and into the new year, one of the things that most visitors do not want to see, or they want to see gone when they get here, is the curfew. So the curfew, of course, has been recently extended into November. Of course, I'm pretty sure that there will be discussions about that going forward. Dr. Williams, and for you as well, Roseanne and Paul, I would like you in on this as well. How has the curfew, let's hear from the hotelier first. What are the guests telling you about this curfew? I know at the Crane, your workers stay on a bit later and then they get transported by taxi home safely, maybe a bit after the curfew. But what are the guests saying about having to be restricted to almost being put to bed at 9?
Well, they're actually not put to bed at 9. Once our workers can go home later, they can have a good time at the hotel. So I don't see it as a big problem that some others do. I think safety is much more important. And maybe this is something that BTMI should do a survey of guests to see what they do think and what is important to them. but it's weighing safety with certain protocols. So I think I may be the odd man out, but I think people would be more concerned about the rising cases in Barbados for their own personal safety than the ability to go out and about late at night, because they can be in their own hotel and stay out and enjoy themselves.
Yeah, most people come here to see Barbados and they want to get out. They want to spend some time. They want to enjoy the nightlife. I'm pretty sure the BTMI has been getting some questions about when will the curfew end.
The questions that we're getting are mainly from the local sector, because they're getting the feedback directly from their guests. I tell you my perspective on the curfew. The Ministry of Health has determined that we need a curfew because they want to control the rising numbers. I am going to be the last person to second guess that that is the right thing to do at this point. I will be the last person, because I have seen what happens during the day when it's light out, and I'm amazed at the way people are still congregating. If the Ministry of Health, with the resources that they have, and certainly the COVID monitoring unit, has determined that the curfew right now, and I'm told that, these are things that are looked at constantly, but if they think right now that that is what is appropriate, again, I will follow the lead of health to represent what most of the persons in the sector, unlike what Paul has said, they really do believe that it is a challenge for their guests. But I think it is important that we could perhaps signal that we would move towards a change in curfew, and it is not something cast in stone. The problem is that, the virus does not get a memo about the beginning of the winter season. The virus is doing what the virus decides to do. And when I look at the numbers that we're getting daily of infected persons, whereas I do agree that people will be happier if there was no curfew, I am going to err on the side of the Ministry of Health on whatever they decide is appropriate. Because the single biggest marketing challenge we are going to have is rising numbers. Rising numbers. The curfew may be an inconvenience, and it may not be one of the easiest things to sell, but I believe that the rising numbers is more of a challenge than the curfew. And if the Ministry of Health and their wisdom believe that they still need it right now, and certainly until November the 7th, which is the only thing that they've said when that directive runs out, I'm going to line up. I'm going to line up behind them, because we have to get these numbers down. And if that is part of the puzzle to have that happen, then I'm not going to second guess that. But I have to answer your question. The BTMI has received the feedback from the sector that says that it has been determined to be a challenge by the hotel partners, the accommodation partners. It has a dampening effect on economic activity, obviously, because our restaurant sector has been doing extremely well. I was so pleased throughout COVID, the level of support Barbadians gave to the restaurant sector. At one point, to get into a West Coast restaurant, you had to book 3 days in advance. And obviously, with a very, very early seating and no later seating, you really have cut the revenue and the potential to earn quite significantly. And then for all of the night activities, entertainers, and so on. So the economic impact is very worrying for the curfew. But again, it is going to be short-term pain, hopefully for long-term gain. I think that that's what we have to live with. So I'm going to line up behind the Ministry of Health and say they have been the Ministry of Health has listened, I think, very well. And we've signaled, that there is a challenge with the curfew without saying that you have to do anything, because we basically have to take their guidance. So they're aware. I'm sure. They're aware. But they have to do what is going to help us to get these numbers down. We must not forget that is the goal, to get the numbers down. Vaccinations, yes, testing, and all of the other things to get the numbers down. Number one priority, job number one.
Roseanne, I'm with you, I'm with you. Don't believe I'm not with you. But I know I read the daily cases every morning. And I remember last week it was 382, 381. Before that, 200 plus. Today was 281, I think. And many people are asking the question, is the curfew working, Dr. Williams?
Okay, so I just bring one thing to the fore. There's this decision that has to be made all over the world by every government, every country. Health and wealth. Okay? Health, of course, as medical practitioners, we are going to speak to the processes that need to be put in place to maintain the health of the nation. We recognize that wealth is the determinant of health, and in our case, tourism is an important part of our country's wealth. And so if we don't have tourism, we will not have health for other reasons as well. So there is this tautology, this constant push and pull between these two things. As was mentioned before, all of these things, the travel protocols, everything would change if we got our vaccination rates up. But until such time, the number of fully vaccinated people that we have at this moment, we still have a large number of unvaccinated people in the population who are more vulnerable to catching the Delta variant, and who, when they get it, are more susceptible to having hospitalization, severe disease, and possible death. That is the facts. That's the reality. Okay? Those facts can't change just because I want them to change. Why do we ask for limitation of movement? What does a curfew do? I've heard people say things like, does the virus only come out at night? Or when we had the Sunday restrictions, does the virus only come out on Sundays? It's not about at night or Sundays or anything of the sort. We know that human beings are not very good at moderating their own behavior. And although we say, wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands, do all these things, without restricting movement, okay, without having some restriction of movement, the virus of the crowd, you've heard me say that more than once, it doesn't care where the crowd is or how the crowd gathers, as long as people are mingling together and they drop the strictness of their interactions between each other, there is more chance for spread within the community. And that's a fact. So curfews, lockdowns, all of those things, you may not like those words, but I just want to say here that they have an effect on decreasing interaction. We can't have it perfect, I agree. But we must, as Roseanne said, try to limit the numbers. You know why? Because when the healthcare system becomes overwhelmed, if we have an overwhelmed healthcare system, that is a great deterrent to tourism as well. Tourists don't want to come to somewhere where the healthcare sector is overwhelmed and where they can't deal with simple things. So we have to balance it very carefully. And we have to be very, very careful about not causing our healthcare system to be overrun. So yes, movement restriction and vaccination, but we can't vaccinate ourselves out of the situation we are currently in. And in order to do that, movement restriction should be maintained.
So BAMP still lobbying for the maintenance of that movement restriction. I know it's a difficult balancing act for the government right now because, as you said, Dr. Williams, you have to consider health and wealth can affect health. But we'll talk a bit more about that and some other tourism-related matters right after this short pause. Tourism is the focus of our discussion tonight on the People's Business. And just reminding you about our guests tonight, for those of you who have joined us a bit later in the program, we have Roseanne Myers. She's the chair of the BTMI, Dr. Lynda Williams, the president of the Barbados Association of Medical Practitioners, and Paul Doyle. He is the owner of the Crane. Health is wealth. Roseanne, we've seen, and you mentioned competition in the market. We've seen St. Lucia and Antigua drop the restrictions. And it's clear that's a move to attract more visitors to the island. Fewer restrictions, more visitors, it seems. We're sticking with the curfew for now, at least until November the 7th, and then we will hear what will happen then. Dr. Williams and BAMP is fully for the continuation of that curfew. Can we continue like that into the winter tourist season and still have a successful season?
I don't know if anybody can answer any of these questions. The truth is that at the end of the day, we have very strong numbers on the books for the winter season, very strong. The discussion on, the effect of the curfew is one that's going to continue for a little while longer, probably until it's completely removed or changed to 11 or 12 o'clock or something a little bit more reasonable in terms of, and I think particularly of those businesses that do a lot of night activity, that really, I think the demand is now going to be there, and they're going to be hard pressed to try and limit or almost cut in half what they're able to do at night. Can we have a good tourism season with the curfew? I would want to think that in another few months that it can in fact be relaxed. But if it isn't, we're going to have to still fight the good fight. Because like I said, the virus did not get the memo about the beginning of the tourist season or what we want to do or who we want to attract. The virus is doing what it has determined it wants to do, because we have a large population of unvaccinated, and that's where variants and that's where the virus thrives. So we have to deal with that. There's no question about it. Right now, Shane, we have feedback, and if we look at the data with respect to airline seats, and BTMI just invested, and one of the things we said in our strategic plan and positioning is that we needed to be more data-driven. And we have to thank our director, Anita Nightingale, who went out and was presented with the opportunity to look at a particular tool, Forward Keys, which tracks all of the bookings coming through on all the major airlines. And it tells you exactly where you are. And what it shows is that we have more seats booked at the end of September than we had at the end of August. The balance and the net effect between canceled bookings, whether it's rooms or seats, and the uptick in forward bookings, one cancels out the other. Your hope is that you will always get more new bookings so that your pace forward is positive. And I can tell you from the hard data that we've seen, the pace forward is positive between now and the end of December. So can we hold on to that? It is not only about the curfew and whether we have a curfew. We have some other major things happening in the world. We have a surge happening out of the UK, which we can't forget. What will that do? The UK has changed direction in terms of protocols and how they're responding over the same period that we have had to. Every major destination has to, because the virus is dictating what you do versus the other way around. So we right now have to fight to hold on to the bookings that we have and to increase what we have on the books. What does it take? It takes a situation where people come into Barbados feel safe. So we have a lot of work to do on the ground. The demand is very high. Our interim head of global markets called this evening to say, or when I was talking to her about what's happening, BA has just put on 10 additional flights between December the 10th and January 9th. Today, You don't do that if you're not seeing the demand. And they will have more capacity between now and certainly in December than they had December 2019, which was a stellar year for the UK market. So I can only deal with the data that we have, hard data, not suppositions or anything. And the hard data says that right now we have continued to pick up the pace in bookings. Now you have properties like the Crane, and I think that one of the things that Crane has always been known for is an innovative approach to marketing and their direct sales, the business that they drive to themselves is what has made Crane a stellar property. Well, we know the innovative nature of Mr. Doyle, who pitched up very early and put a lab in his hotel. I mean, you can't want better pivot than that. So people are, as he said, you have really strong bookings and the season is potentially looking really, really strong. Our airline partners, Virgin, British Airways, we just had 2 inaugurals in the space of a 7-day period, and we have another 2 inaugurals to come. A service out of Edinburgh, and we have basically Eurowings Discovery, a new leisure brand as a subset of the Lufthansa group that will do an inaugural here as well. You don't drive airlift unless you have demand. And the demand here, Barbados as a marquee destination has been sought out in some instances. I mean, I sat on some negotiations where we were saying, look, some of this stuff is too rich for our blood. We cannot be spending this kind of money for some of the opportunities. And we're able to negotiate and say, okay, look, we're still going to fly the route. Let's see how it goes. So there are things happening every day that says to us that when airlines look to reopen, that Barbados is one of the destinations they want to have on their roster. So the demand is there. The winter certainly looks strong from the major markets. I would say that one of the biggest concerns that I have, and a lot of the traffic into Barbados is out of the Caribbean traditionally. The airlift out of the Caribbean is a fraction of what it was. And we're going to have to work really hard with our Caribbean partners from Guyana right up the chain to make sure that we get that Caribbean market back and do what it takes. But projecting we're fighting a good fight. And I know there are a lot of destinations out there fighting, but I tell you, they have to try and keep up with us because the directors in the market of the BTMI, you know, they're working for every cent that they earn and they're out there doing a superb job. And I want to publicly congratulate them for bringing the market back from zero. We have brought the market back from zero to where we are and continuing to build. It is no mean feat. It is no easy feat, I should say. And we have those officers to thank, the entire team, locally and internationally.
Well, I'm praying you take that from zero to hero in very quick order. We do have a caller on the line, but we'll take a quick break and then we'll get that question from the caller. Tourism is the topic tonight on The People's Business, and we have a caller on the line. Good night, caller. What's your question?
Yeah, my question is, a lot of these restaurants in Christchurch, The whole area right there, the gap and everything. I pass there and I see the restaurants are crowded with people. Now, they're not supposed to have that amount of crowds in there. And they are crowded every day, at night too. A lot of this virus could be spreading from the restaurants. They know they're not supposed to have the crowd, and nothing is being done about it to correct it. And also these restaurants, I figure, when they're taking in people, they should ask the people, are they vaccinated or not? If they're not vaccinated, they should not be allowed to come to the restaurant. And I think a lot of this spreading that is going on in Barbados is coming from the South Coast. All the restaurants in Finance, Gap, and all that. They're crowded. And I see it. And they're crowded. Another thing I would like to ask about the vaccine. We hear on the air how many people die every day from COVID and people that are not vaccinated. One thing I would like to ask for the government to come and say how many people that have died from that had the vaccine. They never tell you the amount of people that died from the vaccine, that had the full vaccine. They always tell you they didn't have the vaccine. And this is what is happening now. There's a lot of people that do not want to go for the vaccine because they hear people dying. Now, the government never come and say, well, look, we had this amount that died from the vaccine, the others didn't have. And, it has a lot of people worried.
The caller making 2 points there, really. The first one, talking about crowding in restaurants. He said he saw mainly on the South Coast. Of course, the COVID-19 monitoring unit has been doing its best to monitor these situations and, of course, close down businesses where they see them breaching protocols. The other thing he mentioned was about the vaccine. And Dr. Williams, we have these conversations all of the time. It can be a little depressing when you try to get across the message to help people to understand that the number of people who have died who are unvaccinated far exceeds anyone or any number of people who would have died possibly from taking the vaccine or who would have been vaccinated and would have still lost their lives to COVID-19.
Right. So I am looking right now at the Barbados COVID-19 vaccination status report for the isolation facilities. And this is published almost every day, and it shows the number of people who are in primary isolation. Primary isolation is where the sickest people are. Secondary isolation is a step down, and then tertiary isolation where the people who are the least sick. And if you look every day at the numbers where the sickest people are and where you will get most of the deaths from, almost every day it is over 95, 96, 97% of people who are the most ill who are unvaccinated. Okay? So, I mean, that is published. You can see it. It's on GIS website. It's published almost every day, the COVID comms unit. All right? So that tells you that people who are unvaccinated have a much greater risk of being who are ill and most likely to die. I think every day when they report death, they report who is vaccinated and who is unvaccinated. And so where there have been situations where people who have been fully vaccinated have died, that has been reported as well. The vaccine status of every person who died, when it is reported, is also reported. Now, what I wasn't clear about what the caller was getting at was whether he was trying to say that they're not publishing how many people died from the vaccine itself. And that is where I wasn't clear if he was talking about whether he was talking about vaccination status or whether or not he was talking about whether people died from the vaccine itself. And what I can say is that at this point, there have been very few reports, but they are all investigated, and there have been very few reports of people who have actually died following having a vaccine. And in only one case, we have linked it as a possible of death. So there's no overwhelming number of persons. And if you look at the worldwide, there are 4.7 billion people have been vaccinated, which is more than half of the world's population have been vaccinated, right? And very, 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 very few people have had death linked to vaccination. And so, I just want to make that 100% clear. Vaccines are both safe and they're effective. And we have, at this point, as I said, vaccinated almost half of the population of Earth. So vaccination status reported. The number of people who are very ill are largely unvaccinated, and therefore that's why you will see more people dying who are unvaccinated. And there are very, 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 very few deaths worldwide that are linked to vaccination. Vaccines are safe and effective.
I want to give all three of you roughly 30 seconds. Dr. Williams, I will take that as your final comment. Mr. Doyle, Roseanne, prospects for the tourism sector 2021, your thoughts as we look to a brighter future, hopefully.
I think that our partners have shown confidence in Barbados. The tour operators have shown confidence. The repeat guests have shown confidence. And the team at the BTMI has presented the Barbados product as one that people should still seek, and that the island will welcome anyone who wants to come. Mm-hmm. The prospects, I think, are very good. Shane, I think they're very good, but I think we have to knock on wood and keep our fingers crossed, because you don't know what tomorrow will bring. But Indeed. For everything that we know today, the prospects are good. We just have to keep our heads on and try to hold on to the business that we have and continue to grow it. Paul, very quickly.
In the same spirit as Roseanne, I think we're looking at a very good season coming up. The challenge is how to keep that and keep everybody very healthy. It's a huge challenge in the world, and particularly right now in Barbados. And I think we can do it. Other countries have done it. We've done it before, and now we just have to really buckle down and get creative on how we can keep the tourists very happy and keep them coming and keep everybody very safe. Vaccinations are going to play a huge role in that. I'm happy to say that the crane today, I can say we have over 500 employees, over around 80% now and rising quickly are fully vaccinated, and the other 20% are tested with a PCR test every week. And I can also say that we will be looking this week of announcing that everybody coming onto the crane for any of our services, we will expect to be fully vaccinated or tested, and we will check it just like they do in other countries.
Well, thank you so much, Roseanne, Paul, and of course, Dr. Williams, for joining me for this conversation. I think we need to have a part 2, but that's all the time we have for now as we discussed tourism and the policy shift. I'm your host, Shane Seeley. Join us next week for another edition of The People's Business. See you then.